And the interest was in educational equity in the perspective of migrant students. We also looked, as the previous presentations, both to high school selection and to long-term educational expectations. And these two aspects are really very much interrelated. So the issue is very complex. We try to give our perspective, but of course they are just preliminary results, and then the topic can be further explored. So let's start by equality in education, which is the opportunity, the right for students to fully develop their aspirations, their qualities, their skills, and their interests. When we talk about equality in education, the real challenge is about measurement, because we can use different indicators, and they have been used in literature, ranging from resource to access, participation in school, and of course attainments. Attainment is probably the most used kind of indicator because it's very intuitive, very practical, and also because in the last year many surveys have been developed in the direction of measuring students' performance. So the students' outcomes at school are especially used in terms of measure of educational equality. However, also these kind of indicators can have some shortcuts. Because given the fact that students are not supposed to have exactly the same qualities, the same skills at the beginning, and not even the same aspirations, it's unrealistic to expect all the students to have the same outcomes. So also this kind of indicator can be not have some limitations. We decided then to use a different indicator as a measure of equality in education, and this one is educational expectations. Because we think that also having the same aspiration, the same look at the future can be a measure of kind of education, of equality. So we already worked on this topic, and exactly 1 year ago in the INVALSI conference, we showed some preliminary results about educational expectations of migrant students, students with migration background compared with natives. What basically we showed last year was that looking at this, the students by migration background, of course we found, as previously shown, a very strong inequality in the school choice, with native students mainly selecting lyceums, and students with migration background mainly oriented to professional schools. But when we looked at the expectations of these students, there the gap was significantly reduced. So the expectations for the future were more similar than the position in the high school. What was the reason for that? We found that an important contribution to this kind of result was linked to the fact that in the most, let's say, the most disadvantaged kind of school, professional schools, students with migration background have a higher propensity to go to university compared with Italians. So the first row you see the Italian students that want to go to university even if they are in a professional school. In the other rows there are the proportion of students with migration background who say that their expectation is to go to university. So we call them the kind of optimistic students. They are in a professional school, but their expectations are to go to university. That's a kind of, it can appear as a paradox, because it's not the usual path you should think about when you program your study. And so we ended up last year by just looking at these results and proposing some kind of possible explanations, but without giving a clear answer to what is going on in here. So why migrant students are more oriented to university in professional schools compared with Italians. The aim of this contribution now is to go further and try to give some evidence more on this topic, and give so a better understanding of the causes of this apparent paradox. And basically the idea is to look at these expectations not just as cross-sectional, when the students are already in high school, but also looking at expectations a little bit before, in the third year, in the last year of lower secondary school, so the terza media in the Italian school system, and then look at the same students and their expectations when they are already enrolled in high school, so in the second year of upper secondary school, and see if something is going on there, what is behind, if they have already had the same expectations before the high school choice, or if they change their minds from lower secondary school and upper secondary school, just to have more hints, more indication of what is the mechanism that leads the migrant student to aspire more to university in professional schools. Last year we developed some hypotheses as explanations, more than two, but basically two important possible hypotheses we proposed were these two. The first is that we thought that migrant students could always have the expectations and the aspiration to go to university, even before the high school choice, but then in a way they make the decision to go to professional school because it's a safer choice. Like they have an easier probability, a higher probability to access the labor market, and they can, for example, work and study together if they want to go to university. That's a kind of safe base, but the real expectation is to go to university. In this way, if we assume this perspective, in a way we are saying that migrant students can, let's say, have a better ability to take advantage of the flexibility of our school system, which in fact actually allows students to go to university, whatever the high school they attended. So it's okay to go to university, even coming from professional schools. Differently, another mechanism that can take place here is that, as shown in the previous presentation very well, very detailed, students at the end of lower secondary school receive these suggestions, orientations from teachers, families, and they address the choice of high school and in terms also of expectations more through to their direction of professional school work and not university, particularly by teachers. So these have this kind of influence by teachers, school, and families that lowers down their expectations. So they start then to go to professional schools, but then the real expectation, the real desire to go to university, it could be also supported by the fact that they are good students, they have good results in professional school, then it comes out again, and so later on they say they want to go to university. How can we test these two hypotheses? By looking to expectations in 2 points in time, so at the end of lower secondary school, which is what we call grade 8, and in the second year of upper secondary school, which is what we indicated as G10, we expect to find both expectation to go to university, so let's say positive expectation to go to university, both in grade 8 and in grade 10, in support of the first hypothesis. And on the opposite, if we found a change in expectation, an increase in expectations from grade 8 to grade 10, that would give some support to the second hypothesis. Of course, it's not a kind of deterministic causality, because many mechanisms can operate in here, but it's a kind of indication of what can happen before the high school selection. So this is just a graphical representation of what I have just said. This is the first hypothesis. There is a kind of latent expectation to go to university, which is always there, but the students select professional schools for practical reasons, and then it still wants to go to university later on. And this is the second representation, the second hypothesis. The student has lower expectations before the high school selection, and he or she selected professional schools, and later on his true desire comes out and he expressed his orientation to university. Of course, to to develop this kind of study, we have to have data about expectations in 2 points in time. So grade 8 and grade 10. We took data from grade 8 for grade 8 by Teams survey, which is a sample survey, so the number of students is much smaller than INVALSI data. It's about 4,500, and they are in grade 8. And for grade 10, we had data derived from INVALSI tests 2 years later. So we have the whole population, almost 400,000 students distributed in the 3 branches of high school. So we built up this longitudinal data sample by means of the code INVALSI, which allows us to combine the data sets, and we have this longitudinal sample to observe over time. Of course, we selected these 2 sources because they had a very similar question about educational expectations, so that made comparable the outcome that we wanted to investigate. They have very similar categories, so we selected those categories indicating an expectation of university or even more in both the surveys, and we built up a dummy variable, which is 1 when the student wants to go to university and is 0 otherwise. We proceeded by steps, so we had some intermediate results before trying to give an answer to our question about hypothesis of what moves students to the expectation to university. So first of all, we try to model, to better understand what factors predict the expectation in grade 10. So who are those students who say that they want to go to university, and how important is what they say 2 years before. After that, as we found that, especially for migrants, there is a high proportion of students that change their minds from grade 8 to grade 10. We try to have like a profile of the students that has positive change in expectation. And so in the second model, we try to see which characteristics, which factors facilitate an increase in expectations from grade 8 to grade 10. And finally, we just focus on this smaller sample of students in professional schools that want to go to university. So it's a very, very specific subpopulation. It's the point from which we started. And we try to see if they have already this idea before or not. This is really like the point where we try to test the 2 hypotheses I showed before. So this is the first model, and the outcome is a logistic model. The outcome variable is the university expectation at grade 10 versus not university expectations. We see that there is effect of gender, of course, being in Lyceum. You have natives and first generation compared, so 2 groups of population. In the first 2 columns are native students, the second 2 are first generation migrant students. They have the similar profile of factors influence the propensity to go to university. So of course, being in lyceums, having a higher socio-economic status, higher marks, in this case in Italia, but marks by teachers. But when we look at the effect, the weight of the variable expectations in grade 8, we can see that for Italians, it has much higher impact on expectations of grade 10. It's 7 times compared to 2, the effect in the first generations, which means that in the native population for Italians, when a student say that he want to go to university at the end of lower secondary school, then this decision is confirmed later on. The decision is taken in a way, and also for the opposite. A student that decided not to go to university probably doesn't change very much his mind. That's not true but not so true for migrant students who have more often a positive increase in expectations, but also a decrease we have seen. So we have like some support to our hypothesis, and we then decided to better investigate okay, now here is the percentage of students that change. Okay, that changes mind in a positive direction, divided by typology of school, lyceum, technical school and professional schools, and by migration group. So you can see in the lyceum the effect is not very much pronounced, but in technical and professional schools, the proportion of students that have any positive increase in expectations is very much higher for migrant, especially for first generation students, and is 15%, almost 16% in technical school, and is 29%, so very, very much higher in professional schools. So we then decided to have a look to the factors that influence this positive change in expectations. Here we have the whole population of students all together, and we can see that a risk factor for changing your mind in positives is to be a boy, to be in a technical and professional school, but there is also a clear indication of the effect of being a first-generation migrant compared with an Italian. You have twice the risk of changing in positive your mind respect as an Italian student. As a final analysis, we looked, as I said, only to the very smaller subpopulation of optimistic students, so those students in professional schools that say that want to go to university. And here it is important to bear in mind that having as a base a sample survey, which is TIMSS, the numbers are not so high, so even if it's weighted, but the results are a little bit unstable due to the sample size. And so we don't interpret the result as like a precise value, but more as an indication of something that is going on behind students' choices. So here you have, in the same violet, the proportion of students that have a positive change in expectations. So these are all the students that are in professional schools and they say they want to go to university. And for native students, only 27% already say that for before, and that would be interesting to understand better who they are, but it could be that they are very selected professional schools of high level and also directed to the university later on. But what is interesting here is that for first generation, also for second generation, but especially for first generation migrant students, it seems that almost the entire group, almost all of them, they oh no, the number is not correct. There is not 23 or first generation. It's more than 90%. It's about 95%. They change their mind in the passage from G8 to G10. So they start the high school, in professional school, say that they don't want to go to university, and then 2 years later they say that they want to go there. So what we have found in this part of work is that educational expectations are more stable for Italians and more unstable for migrant students. That for migrant students, especially first generation, so those arrived in Italy, not born here, they very often have this positive change in expectation in 2 years, in this 2 years range of time, and that when we look especially to these optimistic students, who are those that aspire to university despite the fact that they are in professionals, it seems that for migrant students what is going on there is it's more the fact that they have changed their minds. So it seems these results, this finding seems to give support to our hypothesis that there is this kind of negative influence that occurs before the high school selection that has a strong impact, as shown in the previous presentation. It's not something negligible, it's something that is important for the students and for his family. And the guidance, the opinion of teachers, the orientations, and the idea of families lowers down some expectations, and then the students later on, they show again like an expectation that is higher from what they said before. Why is that important? Of course, because teacher guidance shape the students' expectations, and if we improve teacher guidance, then students can make a more appropriate selection of school, and then in turn we will have more satisfied professional, and in turn again we will probably have more equal and more efficient society also. So that's the hope. Thank you very much.